Thank you, Madison. Hey, thanks everyone for being here. Again, my name is Julie McDonald. I work with Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I'm really glad to see so many people joining us here today for this conversation. I'm going to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Galen Treuer. Many of you participating today may know Galen from different parts of the community. Galen brings a mix of experiences to us, from climate-related risk and economic development work to creative and community-based projects. And Galen has been incredibly generous with his time here in Duluth. Galen volunteers with local partners on resilience and stewardship efforts, including work on Minnesota Point. And he's definitely someone who shows up when there's a need or a question worth exploring. Something I appreciate about Galen is that he brings both curiosity and practicality to conversations about changing conditions in our region. And today's talk is intentionally exploratory. He'll be posing questions as much as offering ideas, which is very much in the spirit of these conversations. Again, I want to encourage you during Galen's talk, if you have questions, please add them into the Q&A. And then after his talk, we'll spend some time going through the questions. And we may not have all the answers, but we're definitely happy to talk through what we can. So with that, please join me in welcoming Galen. Take it away. Thanks, Galen.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Madison. It's a real pleasure to be here. I hope that this can be interactive and am definitely open to continuing the conversation if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards. Let's get started here.
I'll let you know when we see. All right, so we see there it is. Yep, ready to go. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so the topic today is changing conditions and regional futures in Northeast Minnesota. And this is a photo of changing conditions. It's from yesterday. There's some mergansers that showed up on the lake, and then I just saw three swans go by. It's uh, it's pretty great. The lake is definitely changing right now as it melts. I'm Galen Treuer. I grew up in Duluth and I left after high school, lived in the cities for a while, and then spent over a decade in Florida. Also some time in New York and Massachusetts, working in Connecticut. But I'm back now. I moved back a year ago, and it's been a real learning experience. And that's part of what I want to talk about. I want to talk about our region and some of what I learned in South Florida and am trying to translate into this region here. Just advancing here. Here are a couple of photos, poor selfies of me in day glow from the last year. I the one on the left is in the Boundary Waters. The one on the right is at Mesaba Metallics, where they're making a $2 billion plus investment in the region, and it really, I think, shows and highlights the challenges that we have in the region. This place feels more divided than it did when I was a kid around economic issues. Um, and that's part of what I want to talk about because my experience is that there is room to tie together our environmental goals and our economic and community development efforts, particularly things that are underway. We can leverage what's going on already. And also that if we think regionally, we can do this better. Regions are really important for economics. They are kind of the functional level that people live at and businesses live at and ecosystems function at. So that's part of what I want to talk about. Um, but now let's just start with a first question about our region. So I was wondering which industry, this is the first poll question, Madison, which industry and sector has the highest average wages in the region. Mining, construction. This is a healthcare facility that was the largest construction project in Duluth, private sector construction project. You have utilities. And then we have a large professional and technical services community that is a growing sector.
So I'm going to jump in here as your Zoom facilitator. You may have seen a Zoom poll come up on your screen. It looks like about 63% of us have seen that. So it should be kind of above your Zoom window. I'll give folks a few more minutes or a few more seconds to look at those questions. Um, Galen, we're still getting a few more folks responding, but once it slows down a bit, I will end the poll and then reveal our responses. So take about 10 more seconds if you haven't already participated in Galen's poll, and I'll close it. Okay, one more second if you're still pondering. Okay, Galen, I'm going to end the poll and reveal the results that folks shared. Hopefully, let me know if you can see those, Galen.
Oh yeah, interesting. So the polls show that professional and tech, most people think it's professional and technical services, and only one person voted for utilities. But utilities is actually has the highest average wages in the community at over 115,000 a year, followed close by mining. Um, and I think that some of this is also because those industries are smaller and with a higher concentration of high wage jobs. Um, but it is, I think it's useful to look at the data and get a sense of who's working where in the community and what do those jobs look like. It's really important for understanding. And I think it's particularly important as I think about what we're doing as climate professionals. I consider myself a climate professional. I've been working on this since 2010 in different capacities. And this is something that this slide right here is something that Joyce Coffey posted. She is someone that I respect a lot, who's been working in the field for a long time and does a number of look backs and look forwards on particularly the climate adaptation field. And she just posted this, reflecting on her business. She's had a consulting firm, climate resilience consulting, for 10 years. And she says that the planning decade is over. It's time to do implementation. Of course, that doesn't mean you stop planning. You keep planning. We're always doing that. But it really is time for implementation. And I think that that's very true for us here. And I'll try and explain why. We might think, you know what? Northern Minnesota, we are probably one of the least vulnerable places. If you look at this climate vulnerability index, we are super light up here. That means that we are some of the least vulnerable places in the country in terms of climate change. And that is a privilege, but it doesn't mean that we're not affected. Just last year, we experienced some really intense fires. And it's not all climate driven, but it is climate related. And we also experienced poor and degraded air quality due to definite climate fires in Canada. Minnesota has also been experiencing intense economic shocks from these disasters. These are billion-dollar disasters in Minnesota. If you look at it, you can see that there's been a really big spike in the last, I guess, almost 10 years, a little less than 10 years. A lot of those losses are linked to hail and severe storms, like the blowdown that we had in Bemidji last year. And I think it's really important to understand that we are still affected and we are already affected by climate change up here in an economic way that matters to people, matters to their lives, and forces us to make choices about what we're going to do with recovery and limited resources. And these costs come down to all of us. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, you pay insurance. You pay the insurance costs. Those costs are passed through rent. And so everyone is paying for insurance. And Minnesota has just had the largest homeowner insurance premium increase in the country. This is really a challenge, and there are attempts to deal with it in the state legislature, but it's more long term because the costs are actually going up, and that's the issue. There have been extreme hail events that caused $1.5 billion in losses in Minnesota in a matter of 20 minutes, right? And we just can't absorb a lot of those. This is another estimate of costs to date. So these are the costs of climate change from 2020 to 2024, um, estimated by some researchers published at Brookings. And you can see Minnesota is fairly dark, despite our sense of safety. We are paying costs, and a lot of those are insurance, and some of those are changes in heating costs due to climate change and other small accumulations. So these costs are about $1,000 per family is the estimate, depending on how much you attribute to climate change. So you can see them here. I guess it's 888. But the wildfire smoke, we experienced that last year, right? And insurance costs, you can see those. There are also indirect insurance costs where everything gets more expensive. In addition, another way that we've gotten some information about where costs may be going is the state did a Minnesota Climate Adaptation and Resilience Cost Study in partnership with Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. And it found that by mid-century, we could already have $21 billion in costs if we do not take action. And then if we adapt, if we take adaptation actions, we can reduce that overall cost to 2.6 billion. It will cost 2.6 billion to adapt. This will go to our second question right now. Before I go to the next slide. Oh wait, actually, I forgot something. Can you do the question about costs?
So, folks, you're seeing another poll come up about what do you think will be the most costly climate impact to Minnesota? This is a poll where you can type in your answer. And so it will take a little bit longer maybe to think and type it in. But Galen, once I see kind of critical mass, I'll end the poll and we'll get to see some of those responses for folks.
And this isn't a gotcha or anything. Just put your best bet. Maybe you've seen the study and you know where it goes.
Okay, we have about half of our folks that have entered. So take another 20, 30 seconds to put your best guess in. Okay, our responses are slowing down a bit, Galen, so I think I'll end it and we can take a look at what people said. Okay, Galen, can you see this one? You have to open it kind of in a second tab. Otherwise, I can,
Don't see it. No. Yeah, do you
you
want
don't,
to just share a
I'll,
little bit?
yeah, I'll verbalize. So I'm looking kind of at a word cloud of what people shared. Flooding came up as the top response number with eight times. Other high numbers are kind of drought, storms, kind of extreme storms, some infrastructure updates needed, but flooding is the one that comes out at the top for like if we're looking at a word cloud.
Great. So if we look at it, these are the costs from inaction. And they really cluster heavily into health and transportation and infrastructure. So the number one cost is air conditioning. Got to keep people healthy, which was surprising to me. I was surprised that in Minnesota, the number one cost of adaptation is air conditioning, but I think that's an indicator of the changing temperature and the new costs that we're going to be facing. Um, the road upgrades, floodproofing is definitely a real cost, and I think road upgrades often those are linked to flooding with culverts. So good stuff. There's also a lot of crop losses, and forest invasives management is quite expensive. Um, all right. Okay, so one way that we can adapt and that we do adapt is through innovation. And this is, I don't know how many of you have taken an Econ 101 class, but this is essentially the way that neoclassical economics thinks about innovation, which is kind of new ideas, introduction of new technology into an economic system. And the idea is that you move from the blue line to the red line with new technology, and that increases GDP, which is gross domestic product or just economic output. And that's really critical in a region like ours. And it's important because innovation drives the American economy, and this is particularly important in a free trade economy where you're competing on a competitive market against with other producers of commodities because they'll just keep getting cheaper and cheaper. And this is important because it's how we think about economic development and regional economic development. There was an influential book published in 2019 called Jumpstarting America about reviving economic growth across the country because we've been seeing a concentration of wealth and good jobs, high-paying jobs in specific innovation-driven regions. This is came along at the same time with the case study for growth centers, talking about how regional place-based economic development, where you look at what is it that makes a specific region happen, right? That that was a big push, particularly by Mark Morrow, who you see here, and he was very influential with the Biden administration. But I think the idea has really gotten around the country, and a global example that you might think of and be able to think about is Taiwan, which has become the leading producer of chips, and they did that through a cluster development in their region, and it's like Silicon Valley, but they did it much more intentionally than Silicon Valley, and it's been very successful. And that's part of what this attempts to emulate. It's part of what I worked on in Florida. And this is the part of the motivator. So if you look at this, the size of the circle has to do with the size of the community. So you can see us up there, we're a little pink dot or salmon colored dot by the lake. Um, and the fact that we're pink means that we've been losing our innovation jobs. And you can see the clusters of where the innovation jobs are going. And the idea was that this is causing some of the sorting and unfairness in the country, and we can counteract it. When I was in Miami, I started out working on climate resilience, doing strategic planning, and then I wanted to work on implementation because I think implementation is extremely important and got to do that with the private sector through the Office of Innovation and Economic Development. We created we followed a playbook that was laid out by the Biden administration, but also by philanthropy. And it has this innovation ecosystem stakeholder model, which you can see the graphic on the left. It's important to just look at the parts on there. There are entrepreneurs, there's risk capital, there's corporates, there's workforce, there's government, there's universities. And then there are also NGOs often. That's really important. And I think in particular, it's important on the climate side. But a few of us, we worked to bring together the region in Southeast Florida and convince folks that actually our greatest economic innovation goal would be linking our economic growth to climate resilience and taking our vulnerability head on. Um, and we received a total of $24 million between public and private dollars, and that project is underway. We sold it in this way that I don't know how familiar folks here are with this sort of economic development and innovation development, but we had to lay out all of the pieces and how they would come together in our urban environment. And that's what's laid out here. I'm not going to go into the details, but this kind of demonstrates through a graphic how we told our story. And the storytelling was really important because businesses and workforce development and people could see themselves in here, and then also investors. It was really important for federal and private investors to see how we were putting this system together. Here in Northeast Minnesota, we actually already have one of these. So this isn't, I'm not saying like, oh my God, take this new idea. We have a version of it, and it's at NRRI. And actually, as I learned more about this, and as we worked to build the playbook in Southeast Florida, I knew NRRI, and I said, "Oh my gosh, we've already got in northern Minnesota. They're already doing this. There were ideas about building these clusters based on your resources, linking all of the pieces together." Um, and this is where one of their initiatives is called Mighty, the Midwest Industrial Transformation Initiative. And you can see here, and I'm not speaking for them, I'm just referencing. I encourage you to go take a look at them and engage where you can. But they are really looking at engagement. They are going through policy and permitting. They are building things. They're doing feasibility studies, but they're actually constructing stuff because that's critically important. Deployment is critically important. And then they're demonstrating what's possible. It's an Inspire piece, and it's a nice model. Um, it's also happening in other regions. I think one that you all might be interested in is Great Lakes Renew, which is it's based out of Chicago, but it's linking together specific water and water treatment innovators. I think they're doing really good work. They have webinars that you can participate in, and they're tying together different communities. I think it's potentially a an innovation cluster that we could become a part of in Northeast Minnesota, and we can definitely use some of the technologies that they're developing. This is not limited to the Biden administration. This is actually a really old idea of doing place-based regional economic development. It's something that happened in Appalachia. This is one of the first place-based economic development initiatives. The Tennessee Valley Authority, if you're not familiar with it, I think you should be. It's this incredibly massive investment that happened um, after World War II in Tennessee and across Appalachia. And they really transformed the region and made a lot of jobs. It's not perfect. There are a lot of questions about how this works and what the environmental impacts were. But there is no question that it brought a new kind of wealth to the region. And these massive federal, state, and locally coordinated investments working with the private sector can have a large impact. You can see here that there were a lot of dams that were incredibly disruptive and still are, but also provide some of the cleanest power. Ironically, they also have some of the dirtiest power going on at the same time because it is in the middle of coal country. Okay, let's come back to Minnesota. I wanna focus on here, um, and bring our thoughts back into what can we do in this region and what can we learn from this idea of regional place-based economic development, which is a way to funnel resources together in a strategic way. This is the question, what is our region? Here's a version of it, the Arrowhead region. These are the counties that are and the tribes that are in their Arrowhead Regional Development Commission region. And this is another look at what is a region. These are commute times or commutes. These are people commuting. And I think it's a really interesting and in some ways beautiful graphic. But what I think is really important is that a region is not a fixed thing, right? So the US Economic Development Administration has a definition where a region is an economic unit of human, natural, technological capital or other resources defined geographically. And it is often characterized by some economic cohesion. Like a region should function as a unified economic area where entities share labor markets, infrastructure, and services. And regions are also flexible. Like they're often composed of multiple counties. They cross state lines. That's something I think that happens here. And they're defined mostly by their functional economic relationships. And I think folks who are familiar with ecosystems might understand that there is some relationship going on here. So why do these regions matter? They are the drivers of economic transformation. And I think part of what is interesting about our region is if you look at the economic region, it is linked to the ecoregion. It is linked to the geography, it and the geology and the ecosystems, particularly for us in a community that in a region that is economically tied to our natural resources in a number of ways. So if you look at this, we get a little closer, you can see, oh, look at this region. Like the map that we were looking at, you can almost just follow the ecosystems, right? And it's been like this for a long time. We've understood it as a region, different people and different stories, and it's a changing region with a changing story, right? Um, there are, it's complicated. I'm share this image from the 1920s that definitely has, racially challenging components to it. But I think it also acknowledges the folks that are here and have been here for a long time and the fact that people move through here but are here and choose this place because of the specific set of resources that are here and the specific geography, right? That is why my understanding of why the Ojibwe people have chosen this place. It's for very specific reasons linked to the land. And this idea persists forward and it changes. The images change. Our understanding of it changes. This is an image of the port, which is really critical to our economic vitality. It is a really, really important um, vector for cash and capital, which we do need. And it brings in some really good jobs, and it also allows us to be a center of trade and have the mining industry that we do. And also now it's a major trade port for the wind industry, right? And it can continue to be that catalyst. This actually is maybe my favorite current map of the region. Um, I don't know if you know, can anyone guess what this is? It's the Entrepreneur Fund. And so you'll see some graphics here. This is the entrepreneur piece. So we have the pieces here in Northeast Minnesota. And I like this because it's grown kind of organically as the Entrepreneur Fund has gotten larger. And it really is the region where entrepreneurs function, right? Who are kind of centered in Duluth and Grand Rapids and Ashland and Superior. If you have a small business, it reaches across this region. Madison, this is the time for the next question about small businesses. Just a quick question here.
Whoops, my bad, Galen. I'm gonna Relaunch it
Yeah,
in just
no
a second.
problem.
Yeah,
So
numbers
yeah,
got me.
it's
It's
just
coming up quickly.
something that I've learned as an economic development professional, starting as a climate professional, is the true critical importance of small businesses. Um, and this is just a quick percentage guess. You can do your best guess. I will give you a hint. It's more than the state as a total.
Okay, we're seeing the responses slow down. This one, folks, you could just type your best guess answer, and Galen, I will kind of verbalize some of the responses we see as I close it out. So 5 more seconds to answer this one about small businesses and the responsibility for what percent of jobs in Northeast Minnesota. Okay, I'm going to end this poll. Take a look at our results here. Okay, top number is 65, followed by 60, 80. We have a few responses for 40. Um, the range, I'll say, is the lowest response someone's put was 25. The highest response was 85, but we're kind of settling in that like 60 to 80%.
Great. Okay, so this is good. The actual number for 50 and under is 43%. Um, and then if you go up to 100 or less employees, then it's 50, about 59%. And so I think like that's a good anchoring in by comparison in Miami-Dade, it was 80 plus percent that was 100 or less. And a lot of those were micro businesses. But also here in the Northeast, there are 21,000 people who are not in a business, kind of. They're a version of self-employed. So they don't have a formal organized business, but they get their income as an individual, which is a huge number. Um, so 21,000, right? That's for the just the Minnesota counties in the Northeast. And as a comparison, and I think a relevant number, coastal tourism and recreation support 84,000 jobs in St. Louis Lake and Cook County. And those are about a little over 6,000 of those are direct jobs that are in coastal tourism and recreation. And that produces 357 million in wages and adds over 626 million to GDP. That wouldn't be there otherwise. So that's an example. And a lot of those are small businesses. And I think that I think an important thing for us to understand is that they are really connected by our infrastructure network. Um, and this is the Iron Range Resource and Rehabilitation Department, the Department of Iron Range Resource and Rehabilitation. It is an critical department in northeastern Minnesota. You can see the area that they serve, which is, and what they do is they take tax receipts from the mining industry and reinvest them in the community and the economy. And it is a scheme to diversify. It hasn't followed historically exactly the same playbook of innovation clusters, but it was actually critically important for a major innovation, which is taconite. I don't know if you've all been to Iron World. I went as a kid and I learned about taconite, which was functionally invented here in northern Minnesota to deal with the fact that we had taken out almost all of the high grade ore. So we set the standard globally. It was very good for the industry, but then others around the world did the same thing. They used that same technology and then they've improved on it. And so we're now needing to look for some more high value added products around the mining space. And that is the idea of Mesaba Metallics, that they are going to produce a taconite with a higher grade ore, so it'll be more competitive and hopefully have less boom and bust. But all of this investment in the region for particularly for the mining has led to a really robust transportation system. We have a really good transportation system and also a really expensive transportation system to maintain. Um, these are some statistics. It's big. It's a lot. And it is something that we definitely want to take advantage of and also maintain in the right way. Um, I'm gonna and we want to maintain it in the right way because it can be the launch pad for an innovation cluster here. I'm gonna just remind you of these pieces and go through just a snapshot of what's here. I'd encourage you to think about who I'm not talking about and who I'm missing here. Um, Really importantly, university and workforce. We have some great universities here. We have a diversity and some really unique ones like Fond du Lac. Um, we also have really important extension, and I will put Sea Grant into this as well. This is not comprehensive. There is so much more here. And on the workforce side, there's a whole multiple layers of workforce down into the communities at the county level, at the regional level. Um, we have corporations. And I was noticing how many of our corporations have blue and green in their logos here, which is interesting, and probably not just a coincidence. But I don't know if you all know all of these. Sappi is a paper products. I think you probably know Essentia, Minnesota Power, familiar with Bar and Masaba Metallics. Fraser Shipyards is our shipbuilder that's over in Superior. And then I just put these other two, LaBounty and North Shore Steel here to demonstrate some of the really critical piece here in corporations. We don't just need big companies. One of the most critical things that we can have is a complex supply chain locally. And so LaBounty makes cutting tools, really big, really, really expensive cutting tools up into harbors. And those are important for forestry, but also utilities. They can cut down a utility pole. And they're one of only a few companies that do it, three of which are in our region. Like in the world, there are only a handful of these companies that make these tools, and a few of them are here, and they pay pretty well, and they're staying ahead of the game. And then North Shore Steel is a parts manufacturer. They definitely service the region. They service companies around here, but they also service people, service very specific machine needs around the world. Um, and I think actually this is where I wanted to ask the question about small business, Madison.
All right, your last poll is available for folks. So it's name one small business that you love working with in your job.
And I'm gonna keep moving forward, but people can just like think about this and add in. All right, if that works. So another piece is government, and I think this is really critical for our region. This makes our region different, and that's what have found in South Florida was that we had to tell a very specific story about our region and what makes it special and different. A lot of our land, like half of our land, is publicly owned or collectively owned in the tribal instances, and that really changes the dynamics of the community. And you can see there's a lot of tax forfeit land, which is an active question for particularly St. Louis County, but for all of the counties around here. What do you do with tax forfeit land? Um, and there are key nonprofit partners. I just put down Minnesota Land Trust, St. Louis River Alliance, Isaac Walton League as active members in engaging what we do with these public lands, right? And then also like the adjacent private lands. This network is really important for creating the ecosystem that we need. And one of the things that I am most impressed with in our region is what has happened with St. Louis River and the area of concern. Growing up here, I remember going down to the river and doing citizen science sampling, and we found way less stuff than we did in any of the creeks up on the top of the hill. And becoming getting a PhD in environmental science and policy, I got to see a ton of case studies. I've looked at case studies all over the place and seen things not get cleaned up. And incredibly, $500 million has been spent here, and it has cleaned up a significant portion of the contamination. And it's produced local experts, it's produced really powerful collaboration. I see this incredible network that I really hope doesn't fall apart because these projects have been finished. And I know I'm not the only one. And it's also demonstrated the ability in our region to do planning and implementation at the same time because there's stuff that's pivoted, right? Like you found different things, you had to adjust. There wasn't an inclusion of Fond du Lac in the US Steel site as much as there should have been initially, and then there were adjustments and there were compromises that were made, and the project still got done, which is really important and really powerful, and I think a distinguishing characteristic and something that we should keep an eye on as we look at what our economic and climate advantage or environmental advantage is here in Northeast Minnesota. Here's just a picture of the cleaned up US Steel site. It is really impressive to me. Um, and and also, the work is not done entirely. All right, so just a couple of thoughts as I close out here. We have climate and resilience plans in the region. This is just a taste of them, right? But this is going from like local, Minnesota Point 50. I know this one because I'm on the board. We have a coastal resilience action plan. It's specific, it says specific things. The city of Duluth has a number of plans and goals. The Northland Climate Collaborative is doing regional collaboration and working towards building that connection and maintaining that connection that we need at a regional level, right? So it's housed within ARDC. And then there's the Minnesota Climate Action Framework, which provides guidance and planning at the state level. There's also tribal leadership and planning. And some of that is very active and hands-on. It's learning because that is the way that it is done. And then we have even international regional plans like the Great Lakes Commission, which if you haven't seen it, you should take a look at the action plan for a resilient Great Lakes Basin. It's something that I think is worth referencing in your planning, in your work, and it also is a way to tie us in our region where we've been successful to other regions that have successes or are trying and could learn from us. As well, we have economic strategies with climate resilience in them. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge these and then help them work together. One is the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. They have a Fresh Coast Economic Transformation Action Plan, and it has a lot of good ideas for what we could do with our coastal areas here in Duluth. Um, ARDC has the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. If you haven't looked at it, please take a look. They just did community engagement for the next update. It's essentially a 5-year economic development plan, and it's how we get federal funding. It's required for that. But it has climate change in it. You might want to look and see how that's included and make suggestions for how it could be adjusted, but you can also reference it. That's the whole point. You can reference it if you're pursuing a grant or pursuing a project. And then the Northland Foundation has an ongoing project right now that's called Moving Forward Together. It's a thriving rural gap analysis. And it's, I think that is a really interesting look at our region, acknowledging that this region right here that we're in is a rural region. Most of the people live in smaller communities, and it's really the nature of the place that we are rural, and we are characterized by rural things like more people employed by small businesses. That's actually typical of rural. Um, and by long commute times and the need to drive, and a whole bunch of other things that they've documented, including this tension between environmental initiatives, planning, and environmental protection and economic development, perceived and real. Because I think a lot of this is perception, and I think there are a lot of ways that we can move together. So, finishing out right here, I would encourage you to check out the Deeds Northeast Regional Local Look blog and newsletter. And a big thank you to Carson Gorecki. If you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to him. Um, and then attend a Northspan Northland Foundation regional engagement session. There are a bunch of them in May and June. Some are virtual, some are in person. It's totally worth going to that and bringing yourself with whatever work you do. And then talk to a small business about resilience. Ask them what they're doing, what they're experiencing. Is insurance going up? Are you excited about like, are you able to recruit employees because they love to go outside? Are you like, there are all kinds of questions that you could talk to them. You could talk to them about where revenue's coming, weather's changing. I think that those are great ways to go forward. And I will just leave it there and we answer a couple questions. I went a little longer than I had planned, but really appreciate your time.
That's great, Galen. Thank you so much.
Oh, and
I
we can
shared.
close the poll maybe, Madison.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Did we hear the
Just a
results
shout
from
out
that
to
one?
some businesses you like.
Yeah, I'll read the small business shout out. So we got 10 responses. Um, I'll just read them to you. We got Whole Foods Co-op, local grocery stores, the Land Trust, Amity Graphics and Bemidji, Indigenous First, Shoreview Natives, Duluth Coffee, Farm and Forest Growers Collaborative, restaurants, Blue Water Science. So those are some attendees' favorite small businesses on the call. Thanks for sharing, folks.
Do we have any
That's
questions?
great to hear. Yeah, we do have a few questions for you, Galen. And you might need to help me with this first one because it came up early on in your presentation. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
question is, how did you get private investors on board and what group managed the funds? And that would be then for your work in Florida, I'm guessing.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. It's really complicated, and we did not manage those funds. We did not set up a specific fund, but we got them on board through a number of engagement tactics, I guess, talking to them, talking to some regional infrastructure investors. There's a large uh, infrastructure investment firm called I3, and we developed relationships. And one of the key pieces for that was that the mayor talked to the CEO, right? And then we found someone who was particularly interested in resilience and had a resilience portfolio. And then we just made sure that he had chances to talk at our events. And then actually, I developed a relationship with one of their senior people because she happened to used to be a dancer in New York and I was a dancer in my 20s and we just connected. And she was the one that I could use to help make sure that we could get the letters of support that we needed. Um, and ultimately, we didn't create a fund that's an idea for the future, but other regions like in Montana, they developed an investment fund. And my understanding is they haven't structured it yet, but they basically are talking to three or four really wealthy people in that region because around Missoula there isn't that much cash, but there are some really wealthy people. And so they know who the big ones are, and then those folks will help set up what the structure might be, and then bring along some additional friends or provide that base layer. Um, the capital was much less of an issue in Miami because there's a lot of capital going through, still a challenge. It's a much bigger issue here, and I think you may have noticed that was the one that I did not include, right? But I think we can work with partners like Lisk. And I also think this is a big, my bet is that what we need to do is go down to the cities and work at the state level to encourage more capital to come up here. And that is from corporations and private wealth, and also paired with public investment, because we get public investment, but we want to pair it more with private wealth. Thanks.
Interesting. All right. Got another question. I'm going to set it up a little bit. The Great Lakes Compact is meant to stimulate businesses in the watershed to develop water-based businesses. It should give us a competitive advantage over other areas without ample water supply. How do you see regulations like the compact supporting local economic growth in the Lake Superior watershed?
I Yeah, I think that it's really important. It's really critical. Our water is so valuable to our health and to the region, obviously. Um, and water is the thing that ties us together. The one water piece is really critical. And that was true in Miami as well, right? Miami has a Miami water keeper. Um, there are tribes down there that are very clear about the sacred relationship with water, and there are a lot of professionals working in water, and it's really interesting how it brings us together. It's also the primary vector for a lot of risks like flooding, right, and drought. Um, I'm not as familiar with the Great Lakes Compact function, but I think one of the most critical things for investment and business development is a functional permitting process and or predictable, I guess. It's also having predictability and certainty is really, really helpful. And that will be increasingly helpful as we face more climate disruption, right? That is actually where I think our water is really valuable, is just the certainty. And we need to think about how we do that and understand and be proactive about how we want the water to be used and what's acceptable. And this gets kind of at the next question, but I think that we do need to understand how to change our permitting process. And I don't mean that just to accelerate things. I just don't think that it's working for the timelines that we're on, because our natural systems are shifting really quickly and our economic systems are also going to shift really quickly. And our permitting process was set up intentionally to slow things down and give us time to think. Um, and we have to get ahead, which is what planning is supposed to do. But I think we also only learn by doing. And so there has to be some room in there to learn by doing, through permitting, through economic development. It's also really critical for businesses because businesses need revenue. And if they don't have revenue, they won't continue. So that's
All
just a
right.
point to drive it towards revenue. Okay.
All right. Let's see if we have time for more. I think we're getting a couple come in, but one more. One from promoting invitation. How would you suggest approaching the data center issue? Whatever
Yeah.
the issue is.
I mean, I think it is really big. And I think location matters and the benefits should accrue more widely, not just specifically into one community. Um, if there are going to be these economic benefits of it, I'm really concerned about losing wetlands personally, right? And I guess professionally, because I've seen the loss of wetlands lead to increased flooding and lower water quality. So my approach to data centers would be to proactively locate the places where we want to have them, if we want to have them, and have that discussion be planned out, because it's a very specific use. If we're gonna put a new steel plant somewhere, I think we should have a discussion as a community where we were gonna put it. My guess is that there's also a lot of brownfields across the region that might be appropriate, but that is not an expert opinion. That is just my guess. But I think that there's a lot of benefit to be frank about, yes, do we want these, and then where do we want them, and what's the guidance? And I think if we provide that guidance very clearly, we will be able to have a more productive engagement with businesses, they truly want our water and our land and our electricity here, they want to be a part of the community, you can have a really good conversation once you say clearly what your goals are.
Mhm. Yeah. Getting to that guidance is probably the trick, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a couple comments here that you could probably see. We're about at time. I'm just guessing the top one there. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts about using beavers.
Oh
And if
my
you
gosh,
don't,
I have
that's
so many thoughts
not,
about beavers, but we don't have time.
yeah,
And I don't,
great.
and I'm not an expert on it. I just think
Yes.
it's amazing, and there's some really interesting beaver stories in the Netherlands. Maybe
Mm,
you can Google it because they eradicated beavers and now are bringing them back in, but they have a lot of waterworks, and the beavers are like, we want to go mess with those,
yeah.
but they're protected species, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think there are a number of different perspectives on the matter. And then there's another sort of a comment there, and I
Oh
think
yeah,
we're out of
the
time, so maybe you
conferences,
can
yeah,
communicate separately on that one. So
will
thank
do.
you everyone for being here, and the recording will go up onto the Sea Grants website and you can see that. But thanks again, Galen. Really appreciate your time and thoughts. I really appreciate having a big thinker here to present, and that's exactly what we need moving forward is big thinking. So thanks very much. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you so much.